My girlfriend got drunk and killed someone. She begged me to take the fall for her. With red eyes and tears streaming down her face, she said to me, James, I still have my studies and a bright future ahead. I can't let this ruin everything. But you're different. You have no family, no need to study. Serving a prison sentence is nothing to you. I'll wait for you. As soon as you're out, we'll get married, okay? Looking into her hopeful eyes, I nodded, then turned around and handed the recording to the police. The story is about to begin. If you like it, remember to like and subscribe. I suddenly opened my eyes, only to meet Sophia's pitiful gaze. The sensation of drowning had not yet faded, and as I saw her reach for my hand, I reacted and pushed her away. She was stunned, seemingly unable to believe I would treat her this way. But in the next moment, she resumed her usual pitiful demeanor. She leaned closer to me again, but instead of holding my hand, she clutched the hem of my shirt and looked up at me. From my angle, I could see her slender neck and the glistening tears in her eyes. She always knew how to evoke a man's protective instincts. Sophia looked at me and said, James, I know this sounds absurd, but I'm truly out of options. Will you help me, please? James, when you get out, we'll get married. I was silent. Seeing that I didn't speak, she began to sob quietly. I stared at her expressionlessly, realizing that even she knew how absurd this was. She had gotten drunk and killed someone, and she actually thought her boyfriend would take the blame for her. What was even more absurd was that in my previous life, I had agreed, as if under a spell, willingly serving 7 years in prison for her. 7 years later, I was released from prison. I didn't expect Sophia to keep her promise and marry me. In fact, I was so insecure at the time that seeing her living well was enough for me, and I never sought her out. However, Sophia approached me, saying she wanted to marry me. Initially, I refused, considering my criminal record. Even though I had gone to prison for her, I was afraid she would despise me or regret it. But Sophia was relentless. She would often cling to me, bringing me breakfast in the morning. If I didn't open the door, she would sit outside, even if her hands and legs went numb. Sophia also frequently whispered sweet nothings to me, her eyes filled with affection whenever she looked at me, reminding me of our passionate love affair. Day after day, her persistence melted even the coldest heart, and I agreed to marry her. But Sophia deceived me. On the wedding day, she was the bride, but the groom was not me. While she was canoodling with someone else, I was stuffed into a sack and thrown into the sea by her accomplices. I never expected that upon opening my eyes, I would be back at the moment when Sophia asked me to take the fall for her. At this thought, my eyes darkened. Until my death, I never understood why Sophia would go to such great lengths to kill me. Did she just find it amusing to see me groveling at her feet? Seeing that I didn't react for a long time, Sophia continued with a sense of grievance. James, I still have my studies and a bright future ahead. I can't let this ruin everything. But you're different. You have no family, no need to study. Serving a prison sentence is nothing to you. Hearing the same words from my previous life, I snapped back to reality. Lowering my eyes, I met Sophia's hopeful gaze, as if a drowning person had grasped the only hope, and I was that sole ray of light. Under her gaze, I slowly nodded. Sophia feigned great delight, reaching around my neck to give me a kiss, but I effortlessly dodged. She was stunned for just a moment, then, seeing my indifferent face, softened her voice. James, I won't let you down. As soon as you're out, we'll get married, okay? I nodded, then turned around and handed the recording to the police. Inside the police station, Sophia was in tears, her eyes filled with resentment as she looked at me, as if complaining that I wouldn't take the blame for her. Seeing her disheveled state, I felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but I kept a composed expression. Sophia, you should take responsibility for your own mistakes. Although I feel for you, we should all be law-abiding citizens and not engage in such despicable acts of shirking responsibility. Sophia seemed taken aback by my words, her face turning bright red, but she couldn't say a word. Watching her flustered, I smiled. I didn't plan to confront her directly because I remembered a detail from my previous life. Shortly before our wedding, I overheard Sophia on a phone call where she mentioned something about a reward. When I asked her who she was talking to, she was evasive, saying it was a cousin's younger sister asking for help with a job. Now it seemed likely that Sophia was involved in a deal with that person, and this person might very well be the one who orchestrated my murder in my previous life. I believed this person would show up sooner or later. Sophia was taken away for questioning, and I used the opportunity to leave. As I walked down the corridor, my gaze fell on a girl sitting on a public bench, Olivia, the daughter of the deceased. In my previous life, it wasn't until after I was released from prison that I learned how difficult life had been for Olivia's family after her father's fatal car accident. Their family was simple, with no significant background, and her father had been the sole breadwinner. After his death, Olivia's mother was devastated and fell seriously ill, relying on medication to get through each day. Olivia became the family's only source of labor. But as a student, she had to drop out early to support her younger brother's education and take care of the household. When I found out about their situation, I scrimped and saved to give them money. However, when I went to see Olivia, she glared at me with red eyes, viciously telling me to leave and that she never wanted to see me again. That look of loathing is something I'll never forget. Later, I learned to be smarter and donated money to them anonymously. From then on, I sent them a sum of money every month until my death. Perhaps I stared at Olivia for too long, because she instinctively looked up at me. Her eyes were swollen and red, as if she had been crying for a long time. Olivia's father had died instantly in the accident, and I was powerless to change that. I stood there, opening my mouth to comfort Olivia, but ultimately said nothing. In this life, we were nothing more than strangers, and that was as far as our relationship could go. Sophia didn't go to prison, she was released. Instead, someone else took her place. I couldn't understand why, even with solid evidence like the recording given to the police, Sophia was still let go. Could it be that the influence of the people behind her was so great that it could bend the law? I was baffled. But soon, Sophia approached me again. She stared at me and said, "James, I was so drunk that night that I got the facts wrong." Fortunately, the police were reasonable and cleared my name. Listening to Sophia's words, I felt a cold laugh inside. If it hadn't been me who went to prison in my previous life, I might have believed her. Her story was full of holes, but I pretended to believe it. Sophia was not surprised at all, because in her eyes, I had always been obedient to her. It seemed like we had returned to the old days, pretending nothing had happened. However, Sophia was now subtly trying to extract information from me. I knew what she wanted to know: where the jade pendant I had worn since childhood was. I was an orphan, raised in an orphanage. When the director found me, the dragon-shaped jade pendant was already with me. I remembered that in my previous life, Sophia had also asked me about the pendant, and I had told her the truth. But soon after, the pendant disappeared. At that time, I didn't pay much attention, as I thought the pendant was useless and didn't matter if it was lost. But now, I realized that Sophia was probably the one who took it. As for what she wanted to do with it, I looked down at her curious face and said with a smile, "Of course it's still there. I keep it in the safe. Although it's useless, it has been with me for so many years." I pretended to be puzzled and asked, "Why do you suddenly think of asking about this?" Sophia chuckled and said, "I'm just curious. James, can you take out the pendant and show it to me?" She nestled in my arms and cooed at me. I suppressed my disgust and opened the safe in front of Sophia, taking out the pendant for her to see. After she had finished looking at it, I unabashedly put the pendant back. Watching Sophia's eyes grow increasingly eager, I curled my lips into a smile. It seemed the fish had taken the bait. Sure enough, 2 days later, Sophia took the pendant while I was away. She thought she had done it perfectly, but little did she know that I had installed cameras at home and had also placed a tracking system on her phone while she was asleep. Following the tracker, I successfully located where Sophia was conducting her transaction. They had arranged to meet in a high-end restaurant, and Sophia entered a private room. Within minutes, she emerged from the room, her face beaming with an extremely satisfied smile. It was clear that the negotiation had gone very well. The person in the private room was cautious and emerged about half an hour later. He was tall, dressed in a suit, and wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. Every move he made exuded an air of aloofness and nobility. I had seen this man on the news before. He was David, the presumptive heir of the Thunder Group. The David family was a century-old dynasty with significant influence in both the business and political realms. How could someone like him be connected to me? After returning home, I immediately searched online for everything about the David family. The information was scattered, but after piecing it together, I discovered something. David was actually an adopted son of the David family, and the true David family heir, who had gone missing in an amusement park over 20 years ago, had never been found. I clicked on the news about the search for the David family's young master and found a photo of him. In the picture, a toddler of 1 or 2 years old was wearing a dragon-shaped jade pendant around his neck. Everything seemed to make sense now. Although the David family publicly claimed David as their presumptive heir, he had no blood relation to them. He was merely an adopted son. As for why David was so determined to retrieve the jade pendant, it was probably because I was in the way. Ever since I uncovered the truth, I became even more diligent in my socializing. I learned that in 2 months, the David family would hold a banquet, and if everything went according to plan, they would announce David as the true successor at this event. My goal now was to get an invitation to this banquet. As for why I didn't directly approach the David family, I was more intrigued by the idea of seeing David's reaction when he saw me at the banquet. Would he remain as calm as usual? Another social event was underway, and midway through, I felt a bit dizzy. I made an excuse to step outside for some fresh air. As I left the room, I suddenly saw Sophia in the corner, clinging to another man's arm. I thought I must have been mistaken. She had told me earlier that she was attending a classmates' gathering, but she hadn't mentioned where. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed them. They walked into a restroom stall, and soon, embarrassing sounds came from inside. "Are you not afraid?" It was the man's voice. Sophia asked coyly, "Afraid of what?" The man chuckled lightly, "Afraid he'll find out?" Who he was, of course, was obvious. Sophia continued, "He's just a fool. He believes whatever I say. I've never seen anyone as stupid as him." The man then asked, "After being with him for so many years, haven't you ever had feelings for him?" Sophia's voice rang out in a coquettish tone, "You're just teasing me. After all these years, who do you think I've liked? If it weren't for his little bit of money, I wouldn't even bother with him. You have no idea, when he was starting his business, I just said I'd always be with him. Guess what? He actually thought I truly liked him. Now that his business has succeeded, he's been treating me so well. What a pushover." Hearing these words, I stood there stunned. Although I had no feelings for Sophia now, I still felt a bit breathless. Back when I was starting my business, no one around me had faith in me except Sophia. I thought her unwavering belief in me was a sign of love, but it turned out she was just making an investment. If the investment succeeded, Sophia would reap huge benefits. If it failed, she could simply discard me without any loss. I still remembered every word of concern Sophia had spoken to me during my entrepreneurial journey. I had cherished them deeply and remembered them to this day. Now it seemed that, apart from those words, Sophia had never made any real sacrifices. Yet those few words of concern had made me devoted to her, even willing to go to prison for her in my previous life. I suddenly felt pity for my past self, who had been so easily manipulated by her. After seeing off my business partner, I wandered aimlessly down the street. It was late at night, and the surroundings were eerily quiet. Not long ago, Sophia had sent me a message saying I didn't need to wait for her because her friend had broken up and she was staying with her to offer comfort. Seeing this message, I just found it laughable. There was no friend who had broken up, it was just an excuse to be with her first love. Now, they were probably somewhere enjoying themselves. Cigarette after cigarette, I smoked until my mouth felt numb. The night breeze was chilly, and the cold wind helped clear my head. Just as I was about to head back, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the street. Upon closer inspection, it was Olivia. Olivia had become even thinner since the last time I saw her. At that moment, she was struggling to carry crates of beer. Watching her unsteady movements, I quickly stepped forward and took one of the crates from her, steadying her. Olivia instinctively looked up at me, and I noticed her pale face and the large beads of sweat on her forehead. I asked nervously, "What's wrong? Where do you feel unwell?" Olivia shook her head, signaling for me to help her sit down. I did as she wished, carefully supporting her as she sat. Only then did I ask if she needed to go to the hospital. Olivia shook her head again, and seeing her clutching her stomach and looking embarrassed, I guessed what was wrong. I tentatively asked, "Menstrual cramps?" Olivia bit her lip and nodded. With her confirmation, I immediately went to the nearby pharmacy to buy ibuprofen and asked for a cup of hot water. Since Sophia also suffered from menstrual pain, I was already familiar with these actions. Watching Olivia drink the medicine, I took off my coat and handed it to her. Seeing her puzzled look, I explained, "It's cold at night. Put it on." Olivia declined, but I wasn't annoyed. I casually placed the coat aside, rolled up my sleeves, and prepared to help move the beer crates. Seeing this, Olivia struggled to get up and grabbed my sleeve. Meeting her insistent gaze, I joked, "Don't worry, I'm not doing this for free." Only then did Olivia let go of my sleeve, and I noticed her quietly let out a sigh of relief. Seeing this, I couldn't help but shake my head and smile. In my previous life, I knew Olivia was an independent girl who disliked owing others and didn't want to show her vulnerability. If Sophia was a parasitic vine relying on others to grow, then Olivia was a weed by the roadside, enduring wind and rain but still growing tenaciously. 20 minutes later, the crates of beer were finally moved. As I was about to leave, Olivia called out to me. She asked hesitantly, "Do you need me to do something for you?" Seeing Olivia's anxious expression, I suddenly felt a mischievous urge. I smiled and said, "Anything at all?" Olivia looked up at me sharply, her brows furrowed into a frown. I knew she had misunderstood. Then just wash my clothes for me, I said, shoving the clothes into her arms. A look of astonishment flashed across Olivia's face, and after a moment, she regained her composure. She shyly whispered, "Thank you. You're a good person." Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. In my previous life, Olivia had wanted to tear me apart, but in this life, she called me a good person. It was quite an interesting feeling. I asked Olivia, "Do you know who I am?" Olivia nodded and said, "Yes, her boyfriend." "Then why do you still say I'm a good?" My words were cut short by Olivia. "No, you are you, and she is her," Olivia said, her eyes flashing with hatred when mentioning Sophia. It seemed she was also aware that Sophia had found a scapegoat. I softly asked, "Do you want her to get what she deserves?" Olivia's eyes widened, and they sparkled brightly. Time flew swiftly, and finally, the day of the David family's banquet arrived. I blended into the crowd, inconspicuous. David was at that moment following his father, engaging in lively conversation with others. He held a wineglass in his hand, with a perfectly measured smile on his lips. Anyone who saw him would find no fault. Until David's gaze caught sight of me, hidden in the crowd. It seemed he couldn't believe I was there. His pupils dilated slightly, and the hand holding the wineglass tightened abruptly. Across the crowd, I raised my wineglass and smiled faintly at David, then took a sip of red wine before turning to chat with someone nearby. Without needing to see, I knew his expression must have been quite unpleasant. I curled my lips into a slight smile. What was to come would make him even more uncomfortable. Halfway through the banquet, it was time to announce the successor. David's father stood on stage with David. I'm delighted that everyone could grace us with their presence at this banquet. Over the years, David's growth has been evident to all. Now, he is fully capable of taking on responsibilities, and I believe he can lead the company to even greater heights. So, I announce. Everyone looked expectantly at the stage, and the reporters' cameras clicked away. But at that moment, a sudden, piercing cry came from the entrance. "David, you can't leave me. I can't survive without you." The woman who arrived had disheveled hair. Her delicate face was streaked with tears, and her beautiful eyes were filled with sorrow, making her look like a pitiful, abandoned, scorned wife. Before we could react, the woman had already run to David's side, knelt on the ground, and clung to his leg. The woman sobbed, "David, you can deny our child, but you can't deny me. Please, I'll do anything if you still want me." Everyone was shocked by the scene unfolding before them, and the reporters' cameras were clicking furiously. No one wanted to miss such explosive news. David had lost his usual composure. He gritted his teeth and said, "Who are you? I don't know you. Security, get this lunatic out of here." David tried to kick the woman away, but he couldn't budge her. Just as the woman was about to say something else, I suddenly sensed something was wrong. Looking up, I saw the chandelier swaying, and directly beneath it stood two people. Without a moment to think, my body reacted. I rushed over and pushed them out of the way, but I felt a sharp pain at the back of my head, and then I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was the white ceiling, and there was a faint smell of disinfectant in the air. The nurse by my side quickly came over to take care of me. She even stepped out to make a phone call during a brief moment of downtime. About 10 minutes later, the door opened again, and to my surprise, it was David's mother. I was somewhat dazed. At that moment, I hadn't seen clearly who was standing under the chandelier. I never expected it to be David's mother. David's mother, who was well preserved and had a gentle smile on her face, looked at me with great gratitude. "Thank you for saving me. If you ever need anything in the future, just come to me." I didn't speak, but my gaze shifted to her wrist, where she wore a string of Buddhist beads. Upon noticing this, David's mother brushed her sleeve to cover the beads and said with a smile, "I'm rather devout in Buddhism." Although she smiled, I could see endless sorrow in her eyes. For some reason, I felt a strange sensation in my heart. Growing up in an orphanage, I had always envied those who had families. In the orphanage, I was introverted and rarely smiled. Whenever someone came to adopt, they would see me and think I had a bad temperament, so no one ever wanted to take me in. I thought I had no family, that I was abandoned. But I never expected that my family had been searching for me all along, never giving up, and even resorting to praying and seeking divine intervention. I stared intently at David's mother, a flood of indescribable emotions rising in my heart. I opened my mouth, about to speak, when the sound of a phone ringing interrupted me. It was David's mother's phone. She smiled apologetically at me, stepped out onto the balcony to answer the call, and soon her voice trembled in disbelief. "What? Found him? Mark, it's really Mark?" Her voice quivered with barely concealed sobs. After the call ended, David's mother hurriedly said to me, I'll come see you again next time, and before I could respond, she quickly left the room. The room fell silent, and I lay there, staring at the white ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts. Mark, the name I had come across in my research for the David family's young master. The David family's young master had been found. How could this be? Could it be that I had guessed wrong, and I was not actually the lost child of the David family? In the following days, there was no unusual activity, except for the unexpected visit from Sophia, who took care of me with great attention, pretending to be the perfect girlfriend. This left me thoroughly puzzled. However, I soon discovered her true intentions. That night, as I was half asleep, I suddenly sensed someone standing by my bed. I opened my eyes abruptly to see Sophia. Upon noticing I was awake, she frowned, raised her hand, and pressed a cloth to my mouth. I struggled, but my consciousness grew increasingly blurry. In the last second before I passed out, I stared at Sophia with deep regret, cursing myself for letting my guard down and giving her the chance to take advantage of me. But now, it was too late for regrets. When I opened my eyes again, my head felt extremely groggy. "Hey, you're actually awake," I heard a voice say. I looked up to see Sophia standing not far away with her hands on her hips. "Carry on," she said, and the two men in black clothes beside me approached, holding a snakeskin bag. A cool breeze blew, carrying the scent of the sea, and I realized that my hands and feet were bound. Looking down, I saw the boundless ocean beneath me. This was the exact spot where I had died in my previous life. Thinking of the suffocating sensation of drowning, I felt utterly overwhelmed. My eyes bloodshot, I gritted my teeth and said, "This is a crime. You'll go to prison if you're caught." Sophia glanced at her nails, then at me, and said nonchalantly, "Don't worry, I won't let anyone find out. Besides," she let out a scornful laugh, "even if we are discovered, someone will protect me." Hearing this, I was stunned. "Have I not been good to you? And yet you want to kill me? Good? How have you been good to me?" Sophia slowly leaned closer to me. Her red lips were like fire, but the words she spoke were as cold as ice. "The problem is, I don't love you." I scoffed inwardly. Just because she didn't love me, she could agree to have someone else take my life. Just because she didn't love me, she could trample on my sincerity so casually. Just because she didn't love me, she could turn a blind eye to everything I had done for her. I lowered my eyes, hiding my emotions. Seeing this, the contempt in Sophia's eyes became even clearer. "Since you're about to die, I'll let you die understanding. Do you know who's protecting me? The David family's heir, David. Aren't you curious how I got to know him?" I was stunned. "It's all thanks to you. If you hadn't stood in his way, how would I have had the chance to gain such a great advantage?" After saying this, Sophia feigned regret and said, "It's just too bad that you messed with someone you shouldn't have." With that, Sophia nodded to the two men in black beside her. They moved to put the snakeskin bag over me, but I wasn't panicked at all. I looked at the triumphant Sophia and laughed. "Thank you. You've taught me a valuable lesson in life. Thanks to you, I've learned that not everyone deserves sincerity." Wait. Before Sophia could finish her sentence, she froze in place because I had already broken free from the ropes that bound me. In the distance, sirens wailed. Soon, the area was surrounded by police. Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief as she stared at me. "You." I dodged the grasp of the men in black and stood beside the police. I looked at Sophia coldly and smiled faintly. "It's over." Sophia burst into laughter, her mind unusually clear at this moment. "What's over? Do you have any evidence?" "I was just taking my boyfriend for a walk by the sea." "What's wrong with that?" Seeing that Sophia still refused to give up, I slowly took out the voice recorder in my hand. At this point, Sophia completely lost hope. She looked at me hysterically. "You actually schemed against me. James, did you have to be so ruthless?" No matter what she said, I remained unmoved. As the police were about to take her away, she suddenly cried hysterically, "I'm sorry, James, I was wrong. You love me so much, you won't let me go to prison, right? We promised to get married, you haven't forgotten, have you?" Hearing this, I finally looked at Sophia. She was no longer the refined woman she used to be. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face streaked with tears, and she looked at me hopefully, seemingly trying to soften my heart. I suddenly remembered the first time I met her. It was pouring with rain, and she was squatting in the rain, crying pitifully. I kindly offered her my umbrella. At that moment, when she looked up at me with her swollen, tearful eyes, she defenselessly entered my heart. If I had known back then that meeting Sophia would lead to all these things, I would rather have not been so kind-hearted. I frowned and said, "My love for you was never a reason for you to trample on my sincerity. Besides, I had already given up on you." When did I give up? Perhaps it was in my previous life when Sophia had someone throw me into the sea. Perhaps it was when Sophia boldly confessed to her first love. or perhaps it was when I heard with my own ears that she didn't love me. But none of that mattered anymore. Sophia was taken away by the police. I regained my composure and met Olivia's worried gaze. I smiled at her and said, "Don't worry, she will be punished." Olivia shook her head and frowned. This is too dangerous." I knew what she meant. Ever since I heard that the David family's young master had been found, I knew David wanted to get rid of me. Sophia's arrival only confirmed my suspicion. In order not to alert them, I took the bait, even though it might put me in danger. But it was a good opportunity to get evidence. Sure enough, Sophia didn't disappoint me. Looking at Olivia, I said, "It's okay. I'm fine, thanks to you keeping an eye on Sophia. Otherwise, I might have really tasted the sea." Olivia's brow remained furrowed as she stared at me and said solemnly, "Thank you." I was taken aback for a moment, then quickly waved my hand and said, "It's not all for you. I did it for myself." The David family, having received the news, rushed over. David's mother burst into tears upon seeing me, and David's father's eyes were also red. I felt uncomfortable inside but didn't offer any comfort. "Let's do a paternity test first," I said. I was afraid, terrified of being wrong. David's father and mother had no objections. The paternity test would take 3 days to get the results. During these 3 days, I was also taken to give a statement. David was arrested at the airport that night. After the investigation, it seemed David was also involved in several murders. Sophia was also brought to justice. They would all receive their due punishment. 3 days later, the results came out as expected. I was indeed the David family's young master who had gone missing back then. David's mother held me and cried her heart out. This time, I had tears in my eyes as I gently patted her back to comfort her. In a cafe, I took out a card and handed it to the woman sitting opposite me. She took off her sunglasses, revealing her face. This woman was none other than the one who had caused a scene at the banquet and embarrassed David. She took the card and took a sip of coffee. "James, no, I should call you young master now." Facing her teasing, I smiled. "Emily, don't joke around." Hearing me call her by her name, Emily also curled her lips into a smile. I didn't expect it to be such a coincidence. I thought we would never see each other again. Emily and I were from the same orphanage. Back then, I was not good with words, but she always liked to follow me around, being my little follower. Later, she was adopted and cried when she left, holding me tightly. After that, I never saw her again. But when I was investigating David, I found out that he had an abandoned lover, and that lover was Emily. I made a deal with her. I gave her $1 million, and she caused a scene at the banquet. Has he been caught? There was no need to clarify who he was. I paused for a moment, then nodded. Emily sneered, "That scum deserves to die." I followed him for 3 years. I thought he had some feelings for me, but when he found out I was pregnant, he had someone forcefully. He's a beast. Poor my unborn child. Perhaps thinking of her sorrow, her emotions became agitated, and her eyes turned red. I handed her a tissue and waited quietly for her to calm down. After a while, she regained her composure and nodded at me apologetically. After a brief silence, I asked her, "What are your plans for the future?" She smiled wearily, "Just getting by. Go see the world." She was taken aback and looked at me. "When you were young and followed me around, didn't you always say you wanted to see the world? You also said you wanted to be a wandering heroine, free and unrestrained." Emily couldn't help but laugh, tears streaming down her face. After a moment, she wiped away her tears and softly said to me, "Thank you." With that, she put on her sunglasses and left. Watching her retreating figure, I thought she was going to become her own heroine. At night, I had a strange dream. I dreamed that the world I was in was a novel, a story about the protagonist transforming from an ordinary person into a business tycoon. The protagonist was originally from a collateral branch of the David family. The year his parents died in an accident coincided with the disappearance of the David family's young master. Perhaps out of sympathy, the David family adopted him, and from then on, he led a different life. The David family never gave up searching for their own child, which made the protagonist feel threatened. So when he learned that the young master of the David family, a supporting character, was still alive, he harbored murderous intentions. He orchestrated the murder of the supporting character through his girlfriend and, as he wished, took over the David family. He then built his own business empire through the David family, becoming a business tycoon. From then on, he sailed smoothly, surrounded by beautiful women, and no one knew about the dirty deeds he had done. And so, the novel ended. I woke up and became fully conscious. I knew that the protagonist in the dream was David, and I was just an insignificant supporting character. Looking at the rising sun outside the floor-to-ceiling window, I smiled. From then on, I would no longer be a minor character, I would become the protagonist of my own life. From that moment on, I threw myself into the family business. With my hard work and keen business insight, I quickly established a firm footing in the business world. I carried out sweeping reforms in the company, discarding outdated concepts and models, and introduced many innovative projects and talents. Throughout this process, Olivia quietly supported me. Her strength and independence always gave me the power to overcome difficulties. I also frequently visited the orphanage to bring warmth and care to the children there, just as I had once longed for. In my interactions with the children, I saw my own past and became even more determined to create a better future for them. As time went by, my relationship with Olivia gradually changed. We had been through so many ups and downs together that our trust and dependence on each other had become deeply ingrained. One evening, as the sun set, I held her hand and walked along the beach, making a lifelong commitment to her. On the wedding day, the sun was shining brightly, and the hall was filled with distinguished guests. Watching Olivia, dressed in her white wedding gown, slowly walk toward me, I was filled with happiness and emotion. All the pain and hardships of the past had become the foundation for the happiness of the present moment. Years later, as Olivia and I sat in the courtyard with our children, basking in the sunshine, I would always recall that tumultuous past. Fate had played a huge joke on me, but with my courage and wisdom, I had rewritten the ending. Now, I had the most precious family and the most beautiful life, the very life script I had sought for myself.